Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started here in just a few minutes. Feel free to let us know where you're watching from in the chat box. Any comments or questions come to mind, you can let us know in the chat as well as the Q&A. Folks are joining the webinar. Feel free to let us know where you're watching from in the chat box. We'd love to hear from you. We're going to get started in just a minute. Today we're joined by Dr. Richard Robbins, University of Minnesota Duluth. So we're very grateful for his time today and his expertise. We have a Lakeville here, Holy Family, Fort Worth. Great to have you. Birmingham, Green Bay. Awesome. Okay, well, while folks are trickling in, we can begin with a brief prayer today. In the name of the Father, and the Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, thank you for this day, and thank you for the time that you're giving us to learn and grow about music and our mission in Catholic education. We ask that you bless us. Please bless our presenter and everyone who will be viewing this live or on demand. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. In the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. So today, our webinar is Reassessing, Renewing, and Rebuilding Youth Choral Programs with Dr. Richard Robbins from the University of Minnesota Duluth. And this is presented in partnership with the American Federation pour Cantores. So a big thank you to the American Federation pour Cantores, as well as Dr. Robbins for his time for joining us. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Robbins. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Really great to be here and to see where all of you are coming from in the chat. Happy to see a few fellow upper Midwesterners as we hit the freezing temps and get ready for another cold winter. But I hope that things are great where you are. And I hope that you are thriving in some way in spite of all of the wild curveballs that the last year and a half, over a year and a half, has thrown at us. It really is an unprecedented time for music directors, for teachers, for choral directors in modern history. So I want you to know that I'm coming at this from a place of real empathy, and that many of the situations that you might be dealing with are very similar the country over, the world over. So I hope we can draw great strength from one another, just knowing that other people care a lot about music, and that folks are really trying to create something beautiful in their school teaching situations, in their parish liturgical situations. We really want things to continue and to thrive for choral music, and I think that that things can. So hopefully you can see the screen in front of me, and we're going to dive right in and talk a little bit about the prospectus for the day. First of all, a little bit more about me. As Jonathan mentioned, I am the Director of Choral Activities at the University of Minnesota Duluth, which some of you might know as the home of Father Mike Schmitz, a relatively little-known priest who sometimes appears on social media and in videos and things like that. It's great to have Father Mike so close to campus, and it's really a wonderful resource for our students. And he's very supportive of our choirs here at UMD, which is really a nice thing. My background is first as a public school music educator. I taught high school choir for several years in the state of Texas. I taught in situations that were in the middle of the city of Houston, Texas, where we served quite a diverse population of learners, and it was work that I really valued and treasured. I am also currently a festival conductor for American Federation pour Cantores, AFPC, the co-sponsor of today's lecture. and we'll talk a little more about some of the festival opportunities that you might find in AFPC. But I've been with them for about 8 years, and they really are a wonderful organization offering liturgical experiences for young people. In addition to my public school teaching, I have worked as a parish church musician for a number of years, for a few years full-time, actually, and part-time, and in collaboration with my teaching schedule and other things beyond that. My children attended and attend Catholic schools, and my wife has served as a full-time music teacher and a part-time music teacher in various parish school situations and cathedral school situations. So I mention all of that because I also have a range of experiences that might be beneficial when we're looking at some of these examples and some of these issues that we'll dive into. So if any of you do have any questions about your particular situations, think about that, and we can think about ways that our experience might work together. The University of Minnesota Duluth is a regional state institution, and what that means for us and as it relates to our situation is that we also receive a number of students who are from a variety of backgrounds and experiences, some of whom come from music programs that are very well established, and others of whom who come to us with less experience. And so I feel like the teaching that I did in the public schools and that I do with my parish music program are things that really inform my work here at the university. So I don't want you to imagine that the university work that all college directors are involved in is the same sort of work. We have a wonderful music program here at UMD, and we do have some music majors, but we also offer options for students who are not involved in a music major, students who maybe are totally new to singing and all of that. And really, teaching is teaching in a way. I also direct community groups. I have worked with the Lake Superior Youth Chorus, a youth chorus here in the Lake Superior region, where I established a choir for young tenors and basses, young changing voices, which really is a super great group. So that is another area that I really enjoy talking about and lecturing on, the changing male voice. So we can talk about all of that too if you have questions when we get to that part of the session. The subjects that we're going to cover, and any one of these could be a really deep dive, so we're going to do some surface exploration of these things, and I hope that it inspires you to think about some other questions or related things that might intersect with your own work. But we're going to deal with issues that I have found in talking with people and in thinking about my own teaching are things that really have changed as a result of our last year and a half, and things that you may be looking for some answers or for some fresh ideas on. Assessment and choir management is very different, particularly because of some of the challenges related to attendance and just who's in the room from time to time. Repertoire is something that we have to really think about in a deep way because of changing numbers. Our rehearsal techniques have changed somewhat just because of limitations of the room, and in some of our school situations, issues of social distance, masking, and that sort of thing. Community building and wellness for students and for ourselves is something that has taken a huge hit during the last year and a half, and something that I think is really important for us to consider as we talk about ways to move forward. And ritual and purpose as it relates to our school music programs and to our liturgical celebrations. Why do we do what we do, and how do we establish for our singers, for members of our community, for parents, a sense that what we're doing is important when we know that in many ways choral singing, group singing has been under the microscope, and people have questioned whether or not some of these things are important for us. I want to be sure that we have time for a robust Q&A, because I find that a lot of the direction and concerns of yours are particular in some ways, but also shared in other ways. So I want to be sure that we have time to talk about your situations, and that I can help you brainstorm about things and help to make your own music programs a little more solid during this time. So moving on, click here, and boom. There we are. So let's talk a little bit about choir management, about routine, and about assessment. One thing that I have found to be a serious challenge in this time, in my own ensembles and in dealing with talking with colleagues in other school situations, is issues surrounding absences and attendance in our own music programs. If your situations are like or anything like the situations up here, and if you're a parent, you're maybe getting these emails all the time, right? A student will test positive with COVID, or a staff member or something like that. Students have to quarantine for this amount of time. If they have a symptom that seems like COVID, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, they're waiting for a test and all of this stuff, they might be gone for a while and then they come back. And this makes it really, really difficult for us to manage a traditional choral program. I feel strongly that we still have to have a way of assessing students and giving students things to do, and to try and participate even though they may not necessarily be in the room. But I want to be clear about this, and you'll notice one thing that wasn't on my list of things to talk about was editing your great virtual choir, because I'm kind of over that in my life. I'm very fast at it now. I guess I can edit home videos and do cool things with that, but I'm not looking to add more of that. It's not satisfying, and it's a different musical experience for the students, and they're not satisfied in the same way I find when they're not in the room singing with other people. Based on my own experience and my experiences in talking with colleagues who are teaching in public schools and in Catholic schools, hybrid is really something that is such a challenge. I just don't think that it's realistic that students that are at home and participating in their way are getting the same experience, and the idea that we have to monitor the folks in front of us and the folks on the screen is really a great challenge. So I find that has been especially problematic for choir directors, and something that we have found is unsustainable. So I don't want to think about that necessarily. I do want to think about a way of normalizing, in a sense, some of the realities of the absent situation that we might find. One thing that we can do to help normalize this, quote unquote, is to think about allowing students the opportunity to understand that choirs can be large or small. And this, I think, is particularly an issue when we're used to a certain concept of choral singing. We're used to the idea that in my classroom, I'm going to have 50, students if I'm a part of a large school or a well-established school music program. Sometimes when we're teaching at small schools, and this was my case in a couple of my public school situations, sometimes folks who are attending these, small choral programs look with envy at large choral programs that might be in the big city or at a larger school, or maybe a well-funded school, something like that has access to a lot of resources. But the truth is, for us as music educators, and particularly for those of us involved in liturgical celebrations, which many Catholic school situations are involved, at least in a tangential way to parish liturgy, is that historically we have a lot of help here. There are historical models for choral singing that are much smaller than the sort of average idea of the middle school or high school American choir that has 100 singers on stage singing as loud as they can, doing stuff in choir robes. So what I found has been very helpful in my own program is to give students examples of small group singing that still are choral models. In the classical world or in the polyphonic world, we can look to really fantastic and renowned ensembles like the 16 or Voces 8, groups of 16 or 8 or even 6 in the case of the King singers that are singing this beautiful music, but it's just a few people, right? The goal here is to help students think about quality rather than quantity. There are examples of small group singing in many musical traditions. Gospel singing, where you're talking about quartets and trios. groups of singers who specialize in spiritual repertoire that are smaller. We had an interaction with the Philippine Madrigal singers in my own choir here at the university. And here's another benefit of Zoom, right? We have the ability to access and to talk with teachers and singers from around the world, which is really, really cool. And as we know, the Philippines has a wonderful musical tradition and is a very strongly rooted in Catholic culture and has a number of composers who specialize in sacred music, who might direct choirs of 12 or 16 or 20. These are different models that our students might not be exposed to, and just finding recordings for those students to listen to can be really great. Personally, when I have absences in my room, I find that I'm recording more of my rehearsals and asking students to watch those on their own. And I might assign videos to students when I know that they're going to be gone for a while and ask them to write reviews. So that it takes a little bit of the awkwardness of trying to sing in your living room while your brother and sister is running around, or maybe your parents are wanting you to be quiet and things like that. These are real challenges for students. But I think there is a way for them to view and to reflect in a way that could be a means of assessment. There are two other things that I have found to be maybe my big takeaways from being totally shut down last year. And these are things that I'm still using in my own choral program. One of those is Flipgrid. I know that many of you are teaching or were asked to teach, at least last year, using a combination of learning modules and learning systems that you find online. Google Classroom is maybe the most popular one for school teaching situations. Canvas is another. And if you haven't used Flipgrid before, which you don't have to use with a learning system that is set up by your school, Flipgrid allows students the opportunity to record themselves and then submit these recordings, and the recordings are aggregated to a teacher's account, and you have the ability to see all of these recordings on your account and review them as you see fit. The beauty of Flipgrid, and this is not sponsored by Flipgrid or anything, these are just things that I like. The beauty of Flipgrid is that it allows you the chance to really assess individually the singing of students that might be away from you for a while. And it does it in a way that's convenient for you. So having a student record something and then share the video on Google Drive, having the student record something and then send you a YouTube link, those things get really complicated. We have the best of intentions, but we just can't keep track of all of that stuff. Flipgrid puts it all in one place. And I'm going to show you the way that this pops up on my learning module. We use Canvas here at school. Hopefully you can see my Canvas page, and I'm just going to scroll down here. It says Voice Exam 1, and this was for an exam we had a few weeks ago. I had posted some things for them to record with an accompaniment track that I created and posted on YouTube. And all of my students are able to record here, and then I can just flip through and give them a grade if I want to in Canvas, or give them feedback. When you set up your Flipgrid, you can make these private so that other students aren't looking at recorded tests for their fellow students. That can be a privacy issue, or maybe you just don't want to do that, and that's what I've done. I think this is really cool. Language teachers have been using this for a long time, and it's a wonderful tool for students. The other thing that I've found that is really cool, hopefully you can see that again, is a tool called Sight Reading Factory. And Sight Reading Factory has transformed the way that that I've approached this subject with my own choirs, and I have been in conversation with classroom teachers, particularly middle school, high school, who are using this quite regularly in their own classroom. So I'm going to pull up another screen that is Sight Reading Factory, and here we go. Okay, so hopefully you can see this, and I'm going to locate my screen. Hang on just a second. Where did you go? Sorry, let me just click open another thing here because that's being not as I thought it would be. Okay, so I'm going to do a new share and go over here. I think you could see my screen, but I couldn't see my own screen. So Sight Reading Factory allows you the opportunity to create assignments that can be linked into your Google Classroom or to your Canvas, or you can just create an account and create assignments for students, and they will go into your account through classrooms that you create. And this really is a wonderful, wonderful tool. When I have students that are absent for an extended period of time, I might assign one of these a day for them and ask them to do one exercise or something like that. It has a number of levels that you can customize, and I want to show you exactly how this works because I think you'll understand more about it just by seeing it. So let's say that I'm working with a beginning choir and I'm just trying to teach them how to get across the staff, and I want to do something that is accessible, something that I can turn over to an administrator and say, yes, this is the curriculum that we're learning. Students are still doing things in my choir, and I'm teaching them subject matter, and this is a real subject, right? We don't, we're teaching them valuable tools that we can apply to a number of music learning situations. Well, what I have the opportunity to do here is to create either single line for solo singers or ensemble sight reading examples that are completely randomized. So it's an infinite number of sight reading examples that are graded by the difficulty level that I've chosen. So I'll show you. If I click the voice family here, and let's say that I'm working with a changing voice tenor, so a cambiata. This would be a limited range tenor voice. And let's say that this tenor is totally new to sight reading. So I select level 1 here, and we're going to do something in 4/4 time. And I'm going to give them a random suggested key signature. So it's already limited my options to C, F, and G. And you can limit all of these based on what you're trying to achieve with your students. If you've created an assignment, then an assignment would pop up at this time, but I'm just going to show you free play so that you can see what this looks like. So I've created a random example here that no one has ever seen before. And anytime that I click the next bar here, it's going to give me a new random example every time that I click it in a range that would work for a changing voice tenor. So in the treble 8 clef, that would be a middle C. This is a good range for a young changing voice. And I have the opportunity to do this forever. There are some settings that I can play with in case I'm teaching things like the names of pitches. I might select pitch names, and then I can teach my students how to recognize the pitches that they are being asked to read. Let's say that I'm asking them to learn how to use solfege, and let's say that I use movable do. Well, I can have it give me the solfege for any of these solo exercises as well, and it's endless. It really becomes a challenge once you get up to like level 6. So if you have an advanced group, if you've got a really crackerjack high school ensemble and everyone reads music, you're not going to be bored by this. On top of that, though, this is very cool for your classroom. You can create an exercise that is an ensemble exercise. And let's say that you have a multi-part choir. You could select unison choir, by the way. But I've got a multi-part choir, and let's say they're just beginning. And let's say I've got a soprano, I've got an alto, and then, I've got like 2 baritones because it's just that kind of choir, right? Well, I can select up to 4 voices, and they can be any voicing that I want. I could have 3 sopranos. I could have 2 sopranos and an alto. I click next, and I'll do the same thing. I'll select my time signature. I'll select a random key signature. I'm going to start my free play. Boom. It's done the same thing, and it's even given me all of this solfege here. So I can pop this up on my smart board. I can pop it up on the projector, and I can teach my students without having to write these things on my own. I can teach them how to get around newly composed examples, which do work. You'll notice C, E, G, D, F. They, however the magic of these computers works, the harmonies always work, and it's really a very cool thing. So that is something that I think of as a kind of we don't wish that COVID had shut everything down, but I am glad to know about that resource because it really has been very valuable for me. Moving on, and I'll remind you, if you've got any questions about anything that you're seeing, or if you have thoughts that are popping in your mind, feel free to pop them into the Q&A, and we'll get to them either during the presentation or when we get to our Q&A at the end. Another challenge for us music directors has been to rethink repertoire with our limited class sizes and with all of these absence issues. So I'm going to tell you about some things that have worked for me. First of all, our choirs are smaller, and without the instructional time that we had last year, I find that students have come in with less skills, and we have to ratchet things back just a bit so that students can feel comfortable and confident in participating while still doing good music. I have found that rewriting repertoire is a skill that choir directors really need to take advantage of during this time. In my experience, I have found that two-part repertoire gives me the most flexibility for rewriting. So if you've been conducting a mixed ensemble, consider switching to two-part repertoire and assigning parts out to your upper voices, your lower voices, or your soprano tenor and your alto bass. Those are good combinations, and it really gives you great flexibility. I remind my students when we talk about rewriting examples for kind of a real-life teaching situation or a challenging situation like we're in, that there are some ranges that everyone can sing in, if you, assuming that you've dealt with some basic pitch matching and things like that, which we can also talk about if time allows. A range of F to C in either F up to middle C or F to C in the treble clef are ranges that both tenor basses and soprano altos in general can match. Your changing voice tenors will be a little trickier because they'll lose that once you get below the A below middle C. But if you can find some music or rewrite things in such a way that you're keeping the meat of the melody between F and C, then that's a starting point, I find. And from there, you can move down from F down to C for your lower voices, or up to F for your upper voices. It gives you a good place to start. Thank you for this question, by the way. I'm going to jump back and talk about this question about Flipgrid and Sight Reading Factory. Flipgrid and Sight Reading Factory, are they free or do they have a subscription or monthly? So Flipgrid, I know, is a tool that many schools opt into or that have purchased as a part of a school learning package. It's provided by Microsoft. There is a free version, right, that has limited functionality. I think that the institutional subscription, which your language teachers may be using, is something that would be paid by the school. Sight Reading Factory has a free limited version that you can experiment with and that gives you one-to-one examples. But the great thing about Sight Reading Factory is it's very, very cheap. So I have a license for my students and I pay, I want to say it's like, it's either $3 or $6 per student. And then I pay a $20 or $25 instructor's license. So you buy your instructor's license or your school buys it, and then you add the number of seats beyond that. And it's really rather inexpensive for you to get the full functionality of that. There are a couple of free music reading things online that you can experiment with, including musictheory.net, which gives you some interval practice and stuff, but Sight Reading Factor really gives you a much greater functionality. There are some other examples of online learning, like NoteFlight and some other things like that, that I found not to be as helpful, but I can tell you about my experience with those. Are those fees monthly? No, the Sight Reading Factory is a year. So the $25 or whatever it is for the instructor license is a full calendar year from the moment that you buy it through the next year. And your seat license, once you buy it, there's no expiration. It's just that once you use the seat license, it's done. And once you start the seat license, it's a year from the moment the student started it. What I mean by that is, let's say you buy a instructor license, and then you say, I've got 100 students, so I'm gonna buy 600 licenses or something like that. But you only have 50 students use the license. Well, those other 50, they're still there. They just won't kick in until you use them. Okay. I hope that answers your question, and feel free to talk some more about that when we get to the Q&A. Back to repertoire. Those were some ideas for writing two-part repertoire. And, I would also remind teachers and students that in history, this has happened all the time. The last big, pandemic was an example of repertoire scaling back. And we know during even the Renaissance, the Baroque era, during the outbreaks of the horrible plague, that composers were taking their own works and rewriting them for smaller voices. And there are some really famous examples of that, and some music actually that kind of works for small choirs now, which is very interesting. Pueri Cantoris does have some resources that I think are super helpful for directors, and I'm going to show you, I hope I'm getting this screen share up here, where those are on the Pueri Cantoris website. So you'll notice if you go to pcchoirs.org and select COVID-19 resources for choir directors, there are a number of tools here that you might access. But something that I've found to be really helpful, besides some of these lists that are available, repertoire for Catholic school masses, repertoire for young choirs, are some downloadable music resources. And in an age where we might be dealing with lesser budgets and things like that, these public domain resources, which are free to use and free to print, can be very, very handy. And we're going to talk about a couple of the rounds a little later. But these are very nice, and they've been looked at by various members of the Pueri Cantoris team, and they have been used in some of our festivals. So I'm a big fan of these resources. Let's go back to the slide. Boom. And there we go. The last thing that I want to talk about when it comes to repertoire are canons and rounds. And I talk about canons and rounds all the time when I'm dealing with school music teachers. I think canons and rounds are a great teaching device. They help teach students independence. And sometimes we think of canons and rounds as being really sort of beginner repertoire, and some of them are, but some of them are really quite advanced and very beautiful and can suit singing even of the most sophisticated young musicians. And I'm going to show you the way that I use a couple of these rounds in my own teaching. So let's go here to this piece by William Billings, Through North and South, which is a piece that is found in that Pueri Cantoris page. So Through North and South, you'll see, is written as a round in 4 parts. Through north and south and east and west, may God's immortal name be blessed, till everywhere beneath the sun his kingdom comes, his will is done. It's a beautiful little round, and students at our festivals really, this was a favorite of theirs when we used it for a festival a couple of years ago. One way to use these rounds is just to sing them as a round, and that's, absolutely fine. But something that directors don't always think about is the way that we can rewrite this and use it as a way of introducing 4-part choral repertoire, or a way of accommodating young students who may not be confident singers, right? The way that we might do this is to assign each line to a different voice part, particularly if we have changing voices, young tenors and basses. Those boys in our choir don't always know what to do. But I can see here that there are a couple of parts of this round that would work really well for just changing voices. So for example, if I had a young bass who could not match anything above the staff, I might just assign them line 2. May God's immortal name be blessed. Limited range, C to G, right? That's a great range for a young bass. They're going to feel comfortable and confident singing that. They're not having to sing too high, not having to sing too low. They could just repeat line 2 over and over and over again while your sopranos and altos are going through the entire round, and it would be perfectly acceptable. It would sound great. Look at the third line. Till everywhere beneath the sun, in the octave below where written, B, D, B, A, B, E, D, D, perfect for a cambiata singer, perfect for a young tenor who may struggle to sing low notes and high notes. We don't know what to do with those singers, but here is something they can do, and it will be really a rewarding musical experience. So I would ask you to give that a shot. There are some books that I recommend to singers all the time and to other choir directors, including 150 Rounds, which is published by Boosey and Hawkes. There is a book of rounds published by the King Singers. And there's a book of rounds that is focused on the rounds of Thomas Ravenscroft, who was a composer of the late Renaissance and the early 17th century. The name of this book is Sing We Now Merrily, a collection of Elizabethan rounds from Ravenscroft. It is published by Boosey and Hawkes, and I've reproduced 2 of them here so that you can see what this repertoire looks like. This music would work well as an introit for your school mass or for a Sunday liturgy. It would work well as a concert piece within the context of a choir concert. And if 10 people are absent that day because of COVID, well, you could just assign people to a different part and you would still be able to put this music on. You wouldn't have to cancel your concert. Look at Miserere Nostri Domine. Here's a round in a Mixolydian mode that's in 3 parts that is really a beautiful round and a great introduction to polyphonic style. And over to your right, you see the Cantate Domino. This is a 13-part round, that is very wonderful in the Dorian mode, and it makes a fantastic concert piece. So again, as complicated as you want to make this repertoire, there's a round for you, I fully believe. Moving on, I have found that choir directors need to rethink rehearsal techniques. I have found that my own rehearsals have become more visual, and I'm asking more students to move together and to conduct as a way of keeping the ensemble together. We have a 3-foot distance requirement that we need to establish at the university, and that's a safe distance. We're also required to mask. We'll talk about masks in a minute. But the further away students are from one another, the harder it is for them to hear. However, they can see. And I think kinesthetic teaching is a great tool for singers anyway, so we should all be doing more of it. I find that my approach to breathing has had to change, particularly because of masks, and this probably is a good time to unite these topics and to talk about things, because people do ask me what kind of mask I happen to be using at the university and what kind I recommend. If you happen to be in a situation where students are required to sing with masks, you've probably found that you need to slow music down so that students have more time to breathe. And here at the university, what we sometimes have students do is just pull out a little bit when they have to breathe in so that they don't suck the mask into their face. A weird skill to develop, but you get pretty fast at it. There is a singer's mask, though, that I actually think is pretty good. And again, I'm not sponsored by any of these things. It's just I ordered literally every singer's mask when all this first went down. And the one that I recommend is the mask that is recommended and endorsed by the National Association of Teachers of Singing. And in the big Performing Arts Coalition study that was looking at all of these masks and talking about how aerosols were moving, particularly after the really tragic stories of group spread in choral rehearsals at the very beginning of the pandemic, which really put choirs under the microscope in a bad light. This happened to come out on top. The first generation of singer's masks was way too heavy. The ones from the Broadway company and some other things, way too heavy, very uncomfortable, very hot. And this mask, I think, is really, really a fantastic mask. This mask has if you'll look at the singer up here who's wearing it, has an extended area for neck movement. And the mask itself is a little stretchy. It's a double ply, and it actually came out as the most protective non-surgical mask in the study. So it's actually quite a safe mask and safer than your average cloth mask. It did very, very well in these studies. And we purchased a classroom set for my students here at the university. They love it. It really, really changed the way that they think about these masks and their singing. You'll notice that the price is pretty good, and it does come in youth and adult sizes, $9.95. People have asked me if they do a group discount. I've not experienced that, and I'd say if you want one, order it and expect a good 3-week turnaround, because a lot of people are buying these. But totally worth it to me. Has really changed the way that our rehearsals work, and I'm happy to talk to you more about that if you have questions. As we think towards, living with this reality for maybe another, half a year or so, I think that community and wellness is something that we don't think about enough. If you're in a choir right now, I tell my students, you've got to be some kind of person. You must really love singing to be in a choir, because all of the things that we associate with the joy of singing, that big group sound, the ability just to be nice and tight and sing with each other, those things have changed. With my own students, when I find that we're especially stressed out, and this just happens sometimes, they come and they just look really exhausted or tired, I will simply ask them to focus on really nice things. And one way that I start rehearsals sometimes is to stop and name one really great musical experience that you've had. That might be something they remember doing in choir. That might be a piece of music that they really love. That might be a piece of music that you're working on right now. But just something to engage positivity with those students, I think, is super important. Wellness is a concept that is sometimes misunderstood by people. We sometimes think of wellness as being, health or something like that, but it's more of a holistic thing. And we should ask ourselves whether we and our students are really doing what they can to feel well, right? Are we giving students time to sleep, time to rest? Are we encouraging students to drink enough water and to just take care of themselves when they're at home? Do we give our students opportunities to think creatively about the music that we are looking at? And do we allow them to engage in the music in an exciting way, allowing them to stimulate their minds, right? Do we understand the viewpoints of our own students and singers as they come into rehearsal every day? Or are we empathetic to what they might be dealing with at home? They may be dealing with stressful situations in their family. Are we creating an environment for them to really experience how musical joy can help them to carry joy into the rest of their lives? Spiritually, obviously, if we're working in a Catholic school or a Catholic church, we have a way of approaching spirituality very directly. But beyond that, we might ask ourselves to consider what the spiritual purpose of singing happens to be. Why are we singing in a moment where it seems so difficult? We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Are we finding ways for our students to connect socially with one another? And are we creating an environment that is conducive to singing? One great thing about the pandemic is that it's allowed us to, explain to administrators that the ventilation that we have in our rooms often is really substandard, and I think that that's a really, really, strange thing for us to deal with. For us singers, and I see in the chat that Jonathan mentioned about singing Sicut Cervus. I think that, which is a beautiful piece, great piece for high school singers even. I find that we teachers sometimes have to remind ourselves to think about our own wellness, and that we sometimes need to go through that exercise on our own, which is, hey, I've just had the craziest day and no one was listening to me, and 8 people were absent, and it was me and 3 people, and what were we supposed to do? And sometimes I've had to stop and ask myself, why am I doing this? What is the thing about this job and about approaching music that is the reason that I got into it in the first place? Super, super important, I think. Oops, sorry, let me go back. I hope that you think that music is important, right? And I hope that those reasons that you're involved in this are things that continue to carry us forward. And I think this actually is a great moment for musicians, and particularly for school choir directors and church choir directors. I've never gone for the line that says that we should be learning about music because it makes us, it'll make us better business people, or, wonderful mathematicians and all this stuff. It's really an integral part of what it means to be a human. It's an integral part of education, and it's an integral part of the liturgy. So I really feel like we have to find ways to make live music happen. We have survived in the choral arts every bad thing that has happened in history. Wars, plagues, everything, right? Choral singing has thrived and has continued. And, as I mentioned, musicians have responded to this in ways that are really, really creative. It's not what we imagined, but it doesn't mean that what we do isn't important. I think that it's important for people to come together and to think about ways that we can unify our approaches, and to still find things to work towards so that our own teaching has purpose, particularly as you might be trying to find your way back after some time off. And to that end, I do want to mention that Pueri Cantores offers a number of really wonderful festival experiences for singers. These festival experiences allow you to work on repertoire and then to combine with other groups so that you can experience strength in song together. It gives you something to aim towards, and in a year where everything has been really up and down, aiming towards a goal is something that can give your program purpose, and that can give you purpose as a teacher. And then your students can experience something beautiful. These liturgies are very beautiful, and it's a great pleasure to be able to participate in them. If you're a new teacher, and there may be some people on the line as we head towards Q&A here, who are new or who have replaced someone who retired or someone who left suddenly, and you may be here looking for answers like, wow, what do I do with these singers? Well, first of all, do some rounds, okay? If you do nothing else, take some rounds and do them. But secondly, a Pueri Cantores Festival is a chance for you to meet other teachers, many of whom who will be experienced, and who have been doing this for a long time, and maybe they have some creative resources and answers for you. So it's a wonderful chance to connect and to network. This hasn't been an opportunity for us to have, because conferences have been virtual, and we haven't been able to just see people and talk to people in the same way. So we're really hopeful that these are going to be great experiences for the student this year, and I'm excited to be back, and I'm excited to have a chance to welcome teachers. You can find more information about these festivals online at pcchoirs.org. That is what I have for you. A lot of information, but I hope some of it was useful to you. And I'd be very happy to take a few minutes for questions before our time is up today, and to see what else you all are curious to know more about. That awkward moment.
While people are thinking about what questions you'd like to ask, just a reminder, if you're interested in a certificate of attendance for today's webinar, there is a link to the webinar survey, that evaluation in the chat box. We appreciate your thoughts and feedback. Great. Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Questions coming in.
I see a question coming in here. How often do your choirs rehearse? What do you recommend for a parish children's choir not attached with a school? What a great question. Okay, so my own choirs are able to rehearse here at the university between 2 and 4 times a week. That's a university situation though, right? So I know that in our local schools, our local Catholic schools, some of them have situations where it's once a week, tied in with like a religion class or something like that. And others are trying to do things every day. What do I recommend for a parish children's choir? Well, for a parish children's choir, the model that works is the model that you need to use, I think. We had success. We were trying to build a children's choir at the cathedral here in the Diocese of Superior over in Wisconsin. And they had an experience where they would ask children from the school and from the parish to come in once a month for an extended warm-up and rehearsal. They would learn a couple of rounds, and they would contribute in that way to the rehearsal. But this is really going to vary from situation to situation. So, more rehearsal is often better, but if you're limited in that way, I still think that there are some creative ways to think about that. I see in the Q&A, do you think community building is best done in or outside of rehearsal? Yeah, great question. Because some people might argue that extensive community building can take time away from preparing for the liturgy, etc., and all of that. And you have to balance your own curricular needs and your liturgical needs with what you're doing. I do a combination of things. We have a retreat that has been outdoors the last couple of years because of limitations of being indoors, which is really a cool opportunity for students to get to know each other. But I have found myself doing more in rehearsal community building this year than ever before, because I just find sometimes that the students need it. And I find that the focus they get from 5 minutes of just engaging with each other and getting some positivity really helps to move things forward. The follow-up to that, what do you suggest your choir, when your choir is only able to typically rehearse the hour immediately before the Mass? Right, well, that's where liturgical expectations are going to guide this train a little bit, right? So you might consider having a situation where students could arrive 10 minutes before that hour, just to have a meet and greet or to get to know you. Or you might consider an organized retreat of some way. I think that can be a really meaningful thing. I hope that's helpful to you. Aaron asks, regarding rewriting repertoire, if you take rounds or other music and change it, is breaking copyright rules if you perform the piece? Well, the good thing about the rounds that I mentioned is that they are public domain, and the rounds that are historical are all public domain. If you take a copyrighted piece and you rewrite it in such a way that would add an accompaniment or something like that, and rearrange it, you may be breaking copyright if you record and then distribute that recording, right? So you do want to be careful. But there's so many historical rounds, and when we're talking historical, now we're talking, copyright is anything before 1926 or something like that. So we're talking, stuff that feels rather recent, and arranging those things by adding a piano accompaniment or rearranging those things by switching parts around. Those are all things that you can easily do, and you're not breaking copyright at all. So just writing a handy accompaniment to start the piece off, then having everyone sing the song, and then having everyone come back in. Some other great ones, the William Boyce Alleluia. Alleluia, Alleluia. Hal Hobson has an arrangement of that was for youth choir, the church musician, and that arrangement is originally from a public domain source. So just go back to the public domain source and base your arrangement on that. Another question, I've maintain adult and teen choral groups, grade school groups, unvaccinated, have not resumed since Zoom summer 2020. What working models have other had in success in a parish setting? Do they sing at Mass now? That might be something some people can discuss in the chat. So if you're in that situation, feel free to type some things, and maybe we can crowdsource some solutions. That is, if you are not singing because the students are unvaccinated, and are they singing at Mass now? What are some of the 5-minute activities that you have found successful within a rehearsal? I think if you're talking about the community building activities, some of those include what I mentioned, which is focus on a positive thing. What I'll have students do is I'll say, find 2 people that you don't know or that you don't talk to all the time and share with them. I'll have them do other things too. Talk about your favorite music from a movie. Talk about your favorite singing moment from a musical theater selection. Talk about the most inspiring moment musically for you at the Mass, and I'll have them go around and do those things. Other things I do are sort of like team building and almost camp activities, really, where stand up if you're if you like this kind of ice cream or that kind of ice cream and stuff. Just things where they get to know each other. Those are all good resources. Any recommendations for dealing, oh, this is a good one, for dealing with the diversity of opinions on masking distances where there is a strong recommendation but not a requirement? And we all know what the strong recommendation but not requirement means, is that it's all over the place. So that is the case with most programs up here where we are. And there's not a fantastic solution, particularly because sometimes, unfortunately, these decisions are seen to be very politically charged. And that is something that, that I think is unfortunate. I have continued to use the resources from the American Choral Directors Association and the National Association of Teachers of Singing in the aerosol studies as a way to justify for my own administration our need to distance and to have masks while we are singing, just in the spirit of being as safe as we can be. I personally, am trying to avoid anything that would draw undue and bad press on my own music program and things like that. And by pointing to those studies, if you want to institute some sort of a distance or mask requirement in your own classroom, but it's not required at the school, you might want to look at those studies and then take them to administration and say, look, this is considered best practice by American Choral Directors Association, National Association of Teachers of Singing, all of the European performing arts organizations. They've all signed off on this. And it's not very restrictive. It just says a little distance, right, 3 feet. And if you're producing a lot of aerosols, you probably should be wearing some sort of a covering just to, make sure that things are safe. That might be a way of getting around that if you have a school situation that has not implemented something like that. But again, I appreciate how difficult the situation is and how opinions really are diverse on this. Will the recording be available later? And I think Jonathan could answer that question. We're approaching the end of our time here, Jonathan, but we might have time for one more question before we head out.
Yeah, feel free to take another question if anyone wants to leave a comment or a question for Dr. Robbins. As far as the recording, this is being recorded, and you'll be able to access it with the same link that you used to register, and we'll send a reminder with the follow-up.
This is a question, kind of a general question. Out of curiosity, is there a particular teaching method you recommend? If your question is about music pedagogy, then, personally, in my own work with children, I use a combination of Kodai and Dalcroze techniques. Kodai, a lot of solfege with my own choir. Dalcroze is a lot of kinesthetic, a lot of conducting while you're doing those things. So if you have a chance to attend a Dalcroze seminar or a Kodai seminar or a summer session, those are things I recommend. And if you're a new teacher, boy, those really would be eye-opening for you and would really inform your teaching. And yes, you're not alone. We're all here, and I think we can thrive, and we're going to find a good way moving forward. I'm optimistic about the future. So thank you all for being here, and Jonathan, thank you for hosting me.
Our pleasure. Thanks so much for your time today. We appreciate your this session, your insights, and your experience. Thanks again, everyone joining us live here and anyone watching on demand. This webinar is being recorded, so feel free to share this with your friends and colleagues, and we hope you found it helpful. And we'll be sending a follow-up with a reminder of how to access the recording. If you're interested in a certificate of attendance for today's session, we encourage you to complete the webinar evaluation, which you'll see in the chat, as well as once the webinar ends. Great. A big thank you to the American Federation for Cantores for partnering with us on this webinar. Thanks everyone so much, and have a great rest of your day. God bless you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Robbins.